everybody, welcome to chapter 19. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at, again, the cardiovascular system, but we're going to be focusing on the heart. There we go. And so a quick overview of the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is composed of heart and blood vessels as well as the blood that runs through them. And it functions to circulate blood throughout the body to maintain homeostasis. So blood carries nutrients to our cells and waste products away. And our heart is the pump that does this. Blood vessels are the roadways. So any disease affecting the heart or blood vessels is known as a cardiovascular disease, and it is one of the leading causes of death. So its main job is to transport blood through the body to allow for nutrient exchange and to get rid of waste products. The term perfusion is the delivery of blood per gram of tissue. And so our cells have to be properly perfused so that they get the nutrients they need and can get rid of the waste products. And this requires blood vessels to be open and the heart to continuously pump. So failure of the heart to pump or failure of the blood vessels to allow materials through them can lead to inadequate perfusion of our cells. And this can also lead to accumulation of waste products in those same cells. And eventually this will lead to death of the cells and potentially death of the body. So let's look at the heart itself. The study of the heart is called cardiology. The heart is the hub of the cardiovascular system, and so it's what causes blood to move. It's a very, very strong muscular organ, and it's pumping blood, about 5 liters of blood every single minute. If you look at on a daily basis, it pumps about 14 liters of blood every day, and over a year it's going to pump about 10 million liters of blood through it. So that's a lot of blood going through that heart. And if you remember the amount of blood that we have in our body, we have about 4 to 6 liters, so 5 liters is the average depending on our size. So it's pumping every single minute, every single bit of our blood through the heart, which is a crazy idea. The heart is located in the thoracic cavity in this region known as the mediastinum, so that middle region. It's right between the lungs. It is about the size of a fist. It has an apex at the posterior aspect, and then its base is up here. The size of the heart will differ depending on an individual. So the individual size, your health, and the amount of aerobic activity you get. So cardiovascular activity like running, jogging, walking, those activities. So the heart has 2 pumps associated with it. It has a right-sided pump and a left-sided pump. The right-sided pump is the pump that takes in oxygen-poor blood and sends it off to the lungs. The left-sided pump then takes in oxygen-rich blood and sends it to our body. So the blood from the right side and the left side don't mix. Blood comes in from the system to the right side and is sent to our lungs. Blood from our lungs is then brought in to our left side and moves to our body. And so the right-sided pump is your pulmonary circulation. The left-sided pump is your systemic circulation. There are 4 chambers to the heart. We have a right atrium and a left atrium. we have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. The atria are considered receiving chambers. They take in blood from either the system through the vena cava or from pulmonary circulation through the four pulmonary veins. The ventricles then are considered the discharging chambers. They discharge either to pulmonary circulation, that would be your right side, or they discharge to systemic circulation, that would be the left side. We also have four valves associated with our heart. We have two atrioventricular valves, the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. And then we have two semilunar valves, the aortic semilunar valve and then the pulmonary semilunar valve. The tricuspid valve separates the right atrium from the right ventricle. The bicuspid valve, also known as your mitral valve, separates the left atrium from the left ventricle. The pulmonary semilunar valve separates the left ventricle from pulmonary circulation, and then the aortic semilunar valve separates the left ventricle from systemic circulation. So here you can see those valves open. This would be when the blood from the atria is pushed into the ventricles. So again, atria are the receiving chambers. They push the blood into the ventricle so that you can take that blood in, and the blood's not going to leave the ventricles until these semilunar valves open. And so here we have the tricuspid and bicuspid or mitral valve closed, but now we have the aortic semilunar and the pulmonary semilunar valves opened. And so blood's going to rush out and enter either the pulmonary trunk and then the pulmonary arteries or the aorta. So let's talk quickly about pulmonary circulation and how pulmonary circulation works. So oxygen poor blood enters the right atrium through our superior and inferior vena cava. This blood is going to move from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve and enter the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the blood is going to be discharged through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk. So that's right here. The pulmonary trunk branches off into right and left, right over here, left over here, pulmonary arteries. And these bring blood to our right and left lungs. So at the lungs, we have the pulmonary capillaries where gas exchange occurs. So oxygen from our lungs enters our blood, and carbon dioxide from our blood enters our lungs. Once this happens, the blood is then going to be sent back through pulmonary veins, and so you can see them right here, to the left atrium. And so if you look, you see this right-sided pump is kind of this blue pump. The veins are bringing oxygen poor blood back to the right atrium. Oxygen poor blood is moving to our lungs through the pulmonary vein or arteries. And then gas exchange occurs and we get this oxygen-rich blood that's going to move back, okay? Didn't work. Hold on. There we go. So systemic circulation then starts when blood enters the left atrium. So here we have the pulmonary veins bringing oxygen-rich blood to the left atrium. The blood then moves from the left atrium through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle. From here, blood is going to be forced out through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, And the aorta then branches off into all the regions of our body, to our head, to our toes, to deliver oxygen-rich blood. And once it delivers oxygen-rich blood, it's then going to take in any waste products like carbon dioxide. And so then blood is going to return to the right atrium through those systemic veins that dump their blood into either the inferior or superior vena cava. So the last thing we're going to talk about in this video, not this chapter, is the membrane that surrounds the heart and then the heart muscle itself. So we have a pericardial sac that surrounds our heart. There are 3 parts to this pericardial sac. We have first the fibrous pericardium. The fibrous pericardium kind of holds the heart in that thoracic cavity. And it restricts movement of the heart, preventing the heart from overfilling, so the heart doesn't burst. Then we have the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. Remember that serous membrane that we talked about last semester. So the parietal pericardium attaches to the fibrous pericardium. So it's that layer of the serous membrane that's attached to the cavity. And the visceral pericardium is the layer of tissue that attaches to the heart itself. It actually makes up the most external layer of the heart, the epicardium. Between that parietal and visceral layer, we have the pericardial cavity, which contains serous fluid. And this is what allows our heart to beat without the pain or friction. And so we have 3 layers to the heart wall itself as well. We have the first layer is that serous membrane, that visceral pericardium known as the epicardium. Then we have the thicker layer known as the myocardium. This is the actual muscle of the heart, cardiac muscle. And the inner layer is the endocardium. It's a very thin layer of simple squamous epithelium with an areolar connective tissue underlying it. This is just a cool picture that I wanted to show you, showing how the heart muscle actually looks. So when we draw the heart, I don't tend to draw the heart properly anyways, but the muscles don't just run in one single direction. They kind of swirl around. This allows that heart pump to really pump hard and push blood from the ventricles and out. And if you look at the ventricles, you can see that there's a huge difference in size. So the right ventricle has a very thin layer of myocardium. The left ventricle has a very thick layer of myocardium. And again, over here when they're contracted, you still see that myocardium is much thinner on this side than this side. So the reason for that, sorry, both ventricles are pumping the same exact amount of blood. They're always pumping the same amount of blood, but the right ventricle is pumping only to our lungs, which is right in that thoracic cavity. The left ventricle is pumping blood from our heart, which is in that thoracic cavity, all the way to our brain and all the way to our toes, all the way to our fingers. So it has to pump farther. It has to use more pressure, more strength to get blood to move farther along. And that's the major difference for why the left ventricle is so much thicker than the right ventricle. So I'm going to stop here in this video, and I'll start the next video talking about the structures, the external anatomy and then internal anatomy of the heart. Bye.